With apologies to Lennon and McCartney, picture a day in the life, a year or two from now. You wake up, you get out of bed, and you drag a comb across your head, and before you go downstairs and take a cup, your personal agent has already scanned your health data overnight, and it's recommending a change in your workout. It's scanned all the news, and it's selected several articles that actually matter to you and will make a real difference. As you go downstairs, it's not only organized your agenda for the day and flagged a traffic problem, it's already started solving problems for you during the day. You arrive at work, you have a production problem, solved. Some big customer issues, solved. Peter Diamandis, the founder of XPRIZE, and is also the CEO of XPRIZE as well. We interviewed him for the book. He said, I've got PeterBot, and it's like having an infinite number of vice presidents. At work, your personal agent has selected a couple of conferences that you need, and it's helped screen some new candidates for some jobs. As you go throughout the day, it's with you. It's not just an administrative assistant, it's your consigliere and your infinite number of vice presidents. On the way home, it tells some good news. You've been interested in buying a piece of property, you put in a bid, and the bid was accepted. The bid is closed, and a contract is signed. And here are 3 designs that you should look at when you get home for a new building that fit with your aesthetic. And I've already recommended a couple of good construction companies that can do the job. Once you select one of those, your bot says, I will manage the entire process, making sure that they're on budget and they're on time. Oh, and it also says, you enjoyed meeting a person named Kai at a couple of conferences. Would you like me to arrange a coffee where the 2 of you could get to know each other? Welcome to the age of Identic AI. This thing is your personal doctor that's been to every medical school in the world. It's your tutor that is literally a know-it-all. It's your librarian and your counselor and your infinite number of editors and developers. It's your 24-hour companion for life. Now, what's your reaction that I've just told you that scenario? Well, some of you may think, well, that's cool. I could use a superpower. That sure would make me more effective and probably help me build a better life. Some of you might say, no, this is science fiction. This is not going to happen, not in my lifetime. You're being unrealistic, suggesting it's a year or 2 out. Some of you might be a little bit uneasy. I mean, isn't technology already interfering in our lives in ways that are not so positive? Hey, social media is hurting our kids. We've all ended up in self-reinforcing echo chambers where the purpose of information is not so much to inform us, but it's sort of to give us comfort for our preconceived views. And some of you may be downright horrified or terrified by this action. What if your personal agent gets away? What if it decides it doesn't need you, that it views you as a sad, little, dumb human being? What if it decides it doesn't like you? You know, remember 2001, HAL, the computer, saying famously to Dave, one of the onboard personnel that's still awake while everyone else is in a freeze, cryogenic freeze. I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that, as he slowly kills off everyone on board. Well, that's why we wrote the book. And the BRI, which I chair, has been doing research on this topic for a couple of years. I'll tell you honestly, I didn't really plan on writing another book, but we sort of stumbled into this thing. And here's the thing. AI is changing fundamentally from being a set of tools to becoming part of the personal experience. Now, a little background. It's a friendly audience, so I'll do that. It's happened to me a few times in my life, and some of you in this room have seen that whole journey, where I thought, wow, this is the next big thing, and nobody's written a book about it. So I got lucky and I wrote a book, and the book was influential and had a big impact. It was a bestseller. And these are some of them. Paradigm shift. Computers are not just about processing data. They're a communications tool. We're all going to use one. A vast network of networks will transform everything. Then right after that book was written, the web came out, and I wrote the first big book about the web. It's called The Digital Economy. There are a bunch. Growing up digital, Michael Furtick is in the room here. He's 15 years old when I met him, and he was my mentor on that book. He just brought his 15-year-old kid today for this event. But that was the first big book about kids and technology in the millennials. The Naked Corporation, David Tickle, was the first big book about transparency as a force. Wikonomics was the first big book about collaborative innovation and social media, and Blockchain Revolution, co-authored with Alex Tapscott, really changed the conversation, shifting it from Bitcoin to something much bigger, an underlying technology, blockchain, that represented an internet of value. Well, here we are. And we've got a new book talking about something new. Now, just very quickly, the background on this. AI has changed a lot in the last few years. We saw the rise of generative AI, and that captured the imagination of the world. And we all started using these tools that could do things. They could generate content. Extraordinary content, information, knowledge, even data, graphics, and so on. And then we saw the rise of agentic AI. Have you heard that term, agentic AI? Where it's not just about generative AI, it's whereby AI could take action by itself through agents. And you don't need to prompt these agents, they just do things. And they're agents now in call centers, supply chains, financial systems, manufacturing systems. And these agents are very powerful. But the most important of all these agents by far are the personal agents, the cognitive extension of you that is with you and is helping you out throughout the day. And we needed a new term for this, so thank you, Harris, for noticing. I came up with the idea of identic AI. Why is that term a good one? Well, sometimes you have to come up with a neologism to describe something for which there is no word that currently exists. And it's our hope that this word will become part of the vernacular and that we'll all be reading about it soon enough. But identity and digital identity has gone through these three big stages, okay? The first one is identity as identification, knowing who you are, or that you're the right, you have the credentials to get into a bar, or to drive a car, or to go across a border, right? Digital identity as identification. The next big stage is our identities became broader, and they started to contain all kinds of data as we leave this trail of digital crumbs as we go throughout life. And these crumbs are captured into a mirror image of each of us, the virtual you. And the virtual you may know more about you than you do in some ways, because you can't remember exactly where you were a year ago, or what you spent, or what diagnosis you had, or what medication you took, or what you got on that test. Dozens of categories of data. And we call this digital feudalism. Under the feudal system, you weren't a slave, that was the previous economy, ancient slavery, and you weren't a wage labor, that's capitalism. You're something in between where you worked as a serf on a landlord's property, and you were tied to a certain piece of property. You created some produce, grew some vegetables or chickens or whatever. The landlord took away most of it, and you were left with some for your personal use. Well, today, you create the asset class of the digital age, data, through your actions in your body and your transactions and so on. But that data gets expropriated by a new species of business. We call them digital conglomerates. And these companies capture your data and they monetize them, become the largest companies in the world. So, in the history of the world. So, and you're left with a few digital cabbages. Brings a whole new meaning to surfing the internet. Sorry, too early in the evening for a pun like that. So, but the next stage is buckle up, because your data that represents your identity, and we've argued that that should be owned by you, it should be self-sovereign, so you could monetize your data and you could protect your own privacy. You don't need a government to do that if you own your data. We could aggregate the data from all these silos and for social purposes, like, say, fighting a pandemic or something like that. Self-sovereign digital identity is data. Well, now that identity is about to get an IQ. And for a lot of the people in this room, that IQ will be 1,000. So this is going to change everything. And AI is no longer just generative AI and tools, and it's no longer just agents out there in the economy. It's a cognitive extension of you. It's your intellect extended. So why should you care? Well, on the upside, these are, what just happened there? Okay. So on the upside, these are some big transformations. And each of these is a chapter of the book. You've all got the book, or most of you, I think, got a book. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because you can read about it. But just think about work. There you are with all this capacity and help at work. How do you manage that? And what's that going to do to work? Lots of issues about what it's going to do to labor markets. I guess if someone has an infinite number of digital vice presidents, they probably need fewer actual vice presidents. And we can talk about that if you want. But also lots of tough issues. Like, how do you hire somebody with an IQ of 300? Do you look at their resume, or do you want to really look at their agent and understand that agent and how well they've developed that agent? What happens when that person leaves the company and all the knowledge and customer information and tacit information and so on that they've acquired? How does that work? What stays with the company and what leaves with them? Well, there are ways to manage that we talk about in the book, but sort of a tough issue. How do you compensate someone in this environment? Somebody with an extraordinary agent, brand new into the workforce, could be more capable than a seasoned executive who hasn't developed that. So everything about HR, as we know it, I think is changing. But it's much more than that. Everything about management is changing. We assume management, Peter Drucker, you got an organization, and it's got a hierarchy, and it's made up of humans. What happens when some of these humans have much more capability than others because of their identic agents? How about learning? Well, we have a broadcast model of learning that I've talked about over the years, Good for the industrial age. I'm a teacher, I have knowledge. You're a student, you don't. Get ready, here it comes, right? It's based on the lecture. We used to unfairly stereotype the lecture as the process whereby the notes of a lecturer go to the notes of a student without going through the brains of either. Now, I appreciate the irony of me saying that, standing up on stage here giving you a lecture. But there are better ways of learning. But we struggled with this in the research. Like, how does all this affect learning? And we ended up thinking, well, you really need to separate two aspects of learning. As kids or in the universities, there's a mastery, anything where there's a right or wrong answer. And there's the much more important stuff, the deeper learning that requires the development of capabilities, your ability to think critically, to write, to collaborate, to see the big picture, to work in teams, to do research, to love learning, and so on. And the mastery stuff is going to be pretty easy because you now have a tutor who's literally a know-it-all who can help you master. But that leaves some tough issues. You know, all of us made this implicit decision with Google and the internet and GPS. We all sort of decided informally, what am I going to store in main memory here and what am I going to outsource to technology? I remember I got in a cab 15 years ago and I was going to this little street called Whifflepot Lane or something like that. And there were like 5 little houses on the street. And one of them was a venue where this thing was happening. So I said to the driver, 5 Whifflepot Lane, with all instructions on how to get there. And he says, right, governor, and off he goes. You know, the London taxi drivers had to remember that. Well, Uber drivers today don't remember anything or any of that. So that was outsourcing memory. What happens when we start to outsource processing to technology? You know, am I going to think about this or am I going to let my agent think about it? Is this going to make us geniuses because we can all think so much better? Or will our actual minds get lazy and will it dumb us down? So on and on, arts and culture. Alex, in his extraordinary book called Web3, talked about how culture needs a new business model. And this predates AI. You know, in Blockchain Revolution, we told the story of how 15 years ago, sorry, this would be 40 years ago, if you were a songwriter, a composer, you wrote a hit song, you got 1 million singles, that you would get paid $46,000 US. Today, 1 million streams will get you $14, which you know, doesn't even cover how much we're paying for a drink out here after the party. So what does it mean all of a sudden when AIs come along? Does it mean a new halcyon day of the explosion of culture where all of us, our innate abilities as artists and creators can now have a whole new powerful vehicle to flourish? Or if we manage that incorrectly, do we end up wiping out the human role in culture? And we've already seen, you know, #1 rock video, music video, performed by this beautiful woman who's actually completely in AI, and the song was written by an AI, and her voice is an AI. Cities and infrastructure. I'm just going to say one word about each. You know, as you go through life, you can interact with the environment around you. Richard Florida, who's at U of T, says where you live is the most important choice you'll make in your life. He's arguably the top urbanist in the world. And well, where you live is about to change because the city won't just be a place, it'll be a system. And so we explore that. Health and wellness. Lots of ways to talk about problems with healthcare systems, but regardless of what country you're in, there's a very fundamental issue, which is a supply and demand issue, if any of you are economists. We have an infinite demand for healthcare and a limited supply. So economists say the way you manage that is through rationing. It's not a pejorative term, it's an economic term, and that's what we do. We do our best, sometimes not very well. The United States, the model is not just rationing, it's also who can afford to pay as a determinant on solving the supply and demand problem. What happens if the supply is infinite? Now, we're still going to need, for the foreseeable future, or orthopedic surgeons to saw bones and, to put in new hips and stuff like that. But for the diagnostic part, and for all of the managing treatment, your medication, something's going wrong here after my hip replacement, what should I be doing about it? All of that can now be augmented by your personal agent. And communities and belonging. This is sort of the touchiest one. You get into the whole world of personal counselors. And be pretty great to have a psychiatrist who's read every book about psychiatry and every paper about psychiatry on board to help you with your problems. But so far the experience has been mixed, to say the least, on that. And there's this horrific story reported in the New York Times of a teenager who killed himself, and his parents found 300 pages of interaction with ChatGPT where the advice was not good. So it ended up being not good because he tricked the bot into helping him learn how to kill himself. So these are huge transformative opportunities, but with every one of them comes a whole set of challenges. Now, every major tech company is quietly retooling its entire product line for these personal agents. And the public, like virtually everyone in Toronto, outside people in this room or people who have read my articles and stuff, still see chatbots like GPT and Gemini and Claude and so on to help them with their basic activities. But the industry right now is building a new basic layer of personal intelligence to create cognitive extensions of all human beings, and for a rollout in 2026. So this poses a whole bunch of tough issues, and you've heard a lot of them. I alluded to some. AI hallucinations, bad advice, the issue of our human agency, and so on. But in the book, we introduce a new issue that we think may be the biggest one, and that most people are not aware of. If this is true, that we're each going to have a digital self, who's going to own the digital you? Who's going to own digital Harris? Well, Meta? Maybe you'd prefer Google or Apple. I mean, these things are going to be running on our rings and our mobile devices and in our home entertainment system and on our watches and in our car when we go to work in the ambient world around us. Glasses is a huge one. But they're all going to be sitting on these giant, massive compute centers owned by the Magnificent Seven. Have you heard that term? The top 7 tech companies in the United States have a collective market cap of 21 trillion US dollars, which is bigger than Europe, than the GDP of the EU countries combined. Never seen anything like this. So, well, our view is no. The digital you has to be self-sovereign. It needs to be owned by you. And consider the implications of that not occurring. You watch a movie or show today and you see product placement, right? Someone places a car or a Coke or something in a movie, and subliminally you think, I could use a Coke, or that's a cool car or something. Imagine placing a product in the extension of your intelligence or even consciousness. How about placing an idea? How about a political view or perspective that might cause you to change your point of view? Where an advertiser, I don't know who would do this, what wealthy gazillionaires might want to change the point of view of a population, but let's say hypothetically that existed. This is the end of human agency. So the stakes are very, very high here. So what are we going to do about that? Well, we've come up with this modest proposal that we need to do nothing but to reinvent the AI stack, nothing less than to reinvent the AI stack. And Douglas Heinzman, Alex Tapscott, both were key in developing this model, and we describe it in the book. Now don't worry, the book's not too technical, and it's tough to explain this in a non-technical way, but very quickly, AI needs to be decentralized. It needs to be open, and it needs to be community governed. Those three things. This is technically achievable through this. It's a new model, and I'll just talk about the foundational layer at the bottom. We can decentralize the physical infrastructure and the hardware and so on. First of all, a lot of it's going to run on these remote devices, but DPIN, it's called, in the blockchain world. We can use blockchain networks. Blockchain is just an internet of value, or anything of value can be managed, stored, transacted, peer-to-peer. And this is not a pipe dream. These systems exist. One's called the Interplanetary File System, where millions of computers around the world all are connected to a blockchain network, and you can store your stuff on this file network. And why would you give up your computer to store stuff? Well, blockchain enables transactions to occur, and through tokens, which are containers for value, all of the people who put their computer onto the network receive some compensation. So other parts of the stack could be stored on this network. Things like the data, and this could solve a big problem, among other things, a privacy problem, but more the ownership problem, where maybe you could monetize your data now if it was decentralized. You probably want to keep a lot of it private, but maybe you anonymize your health data, for example, and give it to science. The AI models, these are the big, large language models. Now, it doesn't mean that there's no role for the big players in this new architecture, but we're going to look at a complex kind of hybrid environment here where marketplaces will exist, whereby different entrepreneurs will aggregate different capability together to create an easy, seamless way for you to build the digital you. And at the level of the autonomous logic, you ever heard of smart contracts? These things exist on blockchains. They're basically agreements made out of software. And so I was, a couple of weeks ago at a conference in Berlin. There was a big discussion about what's more important to, between blockchain and AI. AI to blockchain or blockchain to AI? Well, it's sort of like I replied, because it goes back. I remember my dad used to play this song, Love and Marriage goes together like a horse and carriage. You know, these two are the new pals going forward. Imagine a smart contract, which up until now has not been that smart, genned up through AI. And on the other hand, imagine the logic of an AI network being distributed through blockchain with reward systems to encourage people to participate. And the final level is the application level. So if you know, anything you do, anything that agent does is at the application level, and these tools can also be decentralized. This is technically feasible, but it's also socially and economically achievable. And throughout history, there have been lots of examples. One of the few benefits of being older is that I've been there and I've done that and I've seen it all. Wow, I remember in the 70s when I got going, the bunch, Burroughs, Univac, NCR, Control Data, and Honeywell were the technology juggernauts that owned all the mainframe companies, and IBM. IBM was the only one that got through. Then there were the mini computer companies of the 80s. I can mention a dozen of them. Data General, Four-Phase, Wang, DataPoint, and so on. Gone. The only one that got through was HP because it figured out it wasn't a mini computer company. It was, I don't know, a printer company or something. And then the PC, right? The IBM PC, the center of the world, gone. IBM got rid of it. And now you can buy a PC for the fifth the cost of a phone. So Oh, and then there were the dot-coms, the big juggernauts. You know, when Alex and I got going on Blockchain Revolution, I remember being at Davos. Now, I don't think I'm telling a story out of school here. Well, I had dozens of CEOs of the biggest banks in the world. And let me say, when I introduced the idea of an internet of value that could rationalize the entire financial system, I was not received well. But now they're all scrambling to figure out how can we make money on this, and they're all on board. And even Jamie Dimon says he loves blockchain, digital assets, crypto. He even said smart contracts in a recent interview. So there you go. Harris has seen this as well. So we can do this. It can be done. Innovation can come from the edge. And if you want a great example, Donald Trump a while ago announced the $500 billion collective investment that he was orchestrating in AI. And then a week later, DeepSeek came down and created this model that could do what the other big guys were doing for like one tiny fraction of the cost, and they developed it in no time at all. Mark Andreessen described it as AI's Sputnik moment. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that, but everyone thought the US is just winning the space race until Sputnik went up with a dog in it. And everyone was like, oh my God. So this is achievable. So let me wrap up with just a couple of points here. This is important to Canada. And for lots of reasons, but I'll give you two big ones. The first is, if it's true that humans can have a superpower, then Canadians really need this. Manage the problem, but countries that don't have a powered up workforce are going to fall behind, right? So it's really critical that we get something that we call universal basic AI. It doesn't mean everyone has access to GPT. That's old school. It means that every Canadian needs to have an identic AI that is rich, that is self-sovereign, and that they manage and that supports them in all of their various activities. Now, there's a second, and if we do that, we should be able to solve some big intractable problems, like, say, the productivity problem in Canada. Don't laugh. So the second big issue here is sovereignty. You know, let's face it. Canada is under threat. The President of the United States says that he is using economic force, his words, to bring Canada to its knees and cause us to give up on our national sovereignty and our mission of having our own country, and we'll become a state. God, I hate to even talk about this. But so we need to build a new kind of resilient, productive, and prosperous economy for the digital age, and it's got to be a sovereign economy. Now, there's lots of hand-wringing in Ottawa, as there should be, about something called data sovereignty. Imagine if all of the data that exists, our personal data, company data, government data, that runs on any software developed in the United States. Imagine if a US judge could demand that that data be released. Well, that is a real problem, and it actually exists. So we need to find a way to create data that's sovereign to Canada and runs on sovereign platforms in Canada. But as I said, data is just the tip of the iceberg, because now we're talking about intelligence, okay? The problem is not just that these giant corporations run our extensions of ourselves. That's a problem for anybody in the world, but it's a special problem for Canada if they're massive American corporations that may not have our interests at heart. So we need to have self-sovereign AI as a matter of national sovereignty as well, self-sovereign identic AI. And it means that all of the discussions that currently exist in the policy world about how to protect us around AI are, sure, maybe necessary, but all of their conclusions, you need better regulation and better controls and so on, may be necessary, but they're woefully insufficient. Canadians need to own their digital selves. So let me close with an idea. Meet Bruce and Archie. I don't know, the kids in the room here? Anna? No, she's managing some grandchildren. She's heard me speak before. Anyway, these are our West Highland Terriers. Great dogs. They're wonderful dogs, and they're loving, they're loyal, endlessly enthusiastic. They're very gentle dogs, unless you're a squirrel. That's a big problem if you're a squirrel. But their understanding of the world is narrow. And, we take them for a walk. I take them onto the elevator, and they walk into this little room, and the door closes, and things move a bit, and then the door opens, and then they can go outside. Now, I'm not sure, because their cognition is very limited, what's going on in their minds, but they don't seem to be that interested, basically. It's kind of like a magic room. You go in the magic room, hang around for a bit, and then you get to go outside. They sense patterns and routines, but not underlying mechanics. And that's what it's like to live along, I imagine, alongside a higher intelligence. And as our identic AI emerges, we may start to experience a similar shift, only we'll be not the apex intelligence in this situation. Our personal agent may have the equivalent of an IQ of hundreds, and it'll perceive patterns that we can't see, hold knowledge we can't fathom, navigate complexity that to us feels like an elevator ride for these puppies. So the question is not, will such intelligence exist, but how do we manage it? And writing the book, sometimes something comes to you. I was sitting there one night and listening to some music. Somebody played "What If God Were One of Us?" Just a stranger on the bus. And I thought, wow, this is what it's going to be like to live alongside a God. Now, to be a God is not just to wield power. It's to transcend the limits of life itself. The limits of perception, memory, time, cognition, even mortality. And gods don't just act with force, they act with foresight. They act with a total awareness of reality that's indistinguishable from magic. They remember everything. They transcend the present. They fear nothing, least of all death. And they see the long arc of consequence and history as if it were a single breath. Well, as we enter into this new age, we may get to see what that is like. And because this is a book launch, I'm going to wrap this up reading you a little section from the book. That is, okay. So, Yuval Noah Harari, he said in Sapiens that humans don't just seek prosperity and well-being. We really have this big mission of humans to transcend our humanity and to be deities, to be like a god. Well, we're going to get to see what that looks like. And now reading. If these agents become truly independent, capable of setting their own goals, reasoning in ways we can no longer follow, and developing beyond the values they learned from us, then a new relationship and the power dynamic changes. It inverts. They may cease to represent us and begin to transcend us. What began as a copy and later a derivative becomes an original intelligence altogether. They may cease to represent us and begin to transcend us. A being that sees us as limited, confused, and flickering, still caught in time, still forgetting, still hurting ourselves and others, still dying. At this, then refer to the song, "What if God were one of us?" But if our agents decouple from control, but remain among us, intelligent, invisible, perhaps empathetic or not, we may find ourselves living alongside a new kind of God, not above us, but beside us, not in myth, but in code, shaped by human hands, yet no longer human. If such an entity lacks our sense of vulnerability of right and wrong, then its presence would be less of a blessing and more of a blasphemy. Not just a deviation from our intentions, but a peril of unknowing and unknowable scale. Gods without conscience may walk among us, silent, intelligent, cold, and not for our salvation, but as a force beyond control, perhaps even for our subjugation. In creating minds that cannot bleed, we may summon something divine in power, but demonic in purpose. So on that cheery thought, I'd like to wrap it up. It doesn't have to be like that. And all of the issues that get talked about AI, to me, come down to one issue: who's going to own it and who's going to own you. And there's no more important issue facing Canada and the building of a new kind of economy than this. You'll read about 7 principles for getting this right. You'll read about how we're going to need a new social contract. You remember the social contract, right? As we transition from feudalism to industrial capitalism, we figured out a bunch of stuff. We figured out that people would have to be literate, so we built a public education system. We figured out people would live in the city. We're going to need a social safety net. We figured out if you're going to have publicly traded companies, maybe they should tell their shareholders something once a year. That was the SEC Act of 1934. We've done none of that yet. We're not even thinking about it yet, and some of the challenges. So I'm on a mission. And the mission here is to build a movement. And this book, I hope, will become, I hate to use the term, but kind of a manifesto, if you like, for people to organize around and to bring about change. Who's got to organize? Well, we need entrepreneurs. We need social innovators and NGOs and so on. We need educators. We need the universities. Just had a great talk with Susan Christofferson, the dean at the Rotman School, about what is management in this new world, and what does that mean for a business school? Big issues. I don't know. Guess we should get rid of liberal arts, right? No. We're going to need not just employees, we're going to need citizens and people who can think and who can manage this super complex world. Nothing better undergraduate than a liberal arts, humanities, whatever degree. We told kids 15 years ago, no, do something useful. Study programming or computer science. 90% of all programming will be done by AI at the end of next year, according to Eric Schmidt. So we need education, educational institutions. We need companies, including big companies in Canada, and we need government at all levels to have an awakening, if you like. And if we do that, if we build a movement that involves people from every walk of life and bring our legitimate expectations and our human values to the table by the thousands and by the millions, then maybe this smaller world that those kids inherit and smarter world may in fact be a better one. So I think we're going to do some other stuff now, but thank you so much. Thank you.